What is up? My name is Steven, and this is the Nook Podcast. The essence of this show is and always will be that faith in Jesus is amazing, but it's not all puppies and unicorns. Faith is messy, and it happens in real time. No shortcut, no magic pill, but it is so worth it. If you are a follower of Christ, I hope that you always find encouragement here, as well as challenge to go deeper in your walk with God. And if you are still checking out the claims of Jesus and wondering if any of this faith stuff is legit, you are welcome here. If you ever have any questions or comments, drop me a line. My email address is steven@nookpodcast.com. That can always be found in the show notes, along with links to the Nook Facebook page and my social media feeds. And if you would like to support this show financially, look for a link to Buy Me a Coffee, which is a safe and simple way for you to donate. For this episode, I have the honor of introducing you to my friend and coworker of the last 9 years, Bryce Bagwill. As I was considering who I might bring on the show for this series about prayer, I immediately knew that Bryce would have to be invited. I had heard only small portions of this story, but it was obvious that something significant had gone on when his youngest daughter was born.
Sophia Ann Bagwill was born on January 20th, 2010.
While everything about his wife's pregnancy had gone on without any issues, once the baby had been delivered, there were some concerns.
Well, we induced labor because she had gone past the date. And when she was born, she was about 5 pounds. And of course, in the room, everybody's like looking at each other and concerned. And then they even re-asked, how many weeks is your wife? And I don't remember what the number was, but we were past the time.
Wow, and she was still just 5 pounds.
So the fact that she was that small was immediately something that raised some eyebrows. But, she pinked up like she's supposed to and,
Did the cry, did the things.
All the things you hope. And we had a normal stay in the hospital and went home on normal sort of schedule. And then several months later, we started noticing some things about her body that weren't quite right. She was kind of swelling up. There was clearly some fluid building up. And that gets a little concerning because you're like, I don't think this is normal. And we even went to the first facility we took her to, emergency room. They were like, oh, this is, and the term they used was unremarkable. And I have pictures from that day. So it's like, yeah, they called this unremarkable.
Oh, that's got to be frustrating.
Yeah. So,
even though you got no medical background, I'm
right.
assuming that you and your wife knew well enough.
Exactly.
And something wasn't right.
And Sophie was my second child. So I certainly had not seen anything like this first round, from a previous marriage. So I felt like I did have a little ground to stand on that.
Sure.
You're not going to, convince me that this is normal.
Something's up.
Yeah. And she was clearly in a lot of pain, and there was just enough distress to just be like, okay, we need to.
So you had, I'm guessing you obviously had to go on to a second facility, second opinion of some kind.
We did at the time. We brought her back to that facility because it has a good reputation for newborns and stuff in the city or in this town. So we did, and eventually they took it seriously. So then becomes the journey of fear. My first kid I had when I was in my 20s. Sophie was born when I was in my 40s. So it was kind of like, okay, this is going to be a different ball game. And boy, did it turn into a different ball game. But yeah, they eventually recognized, okay, something's going on, but they weren't sure what the cause was. And so we did some hospital stays there. And I just, we come from a collaborative business. The business model is always like, if you're just going rogue by yourself, there's only so far you can take something. But if you're partnered with a team, you're in good shape. And that's kind of what I kept coming back to was we had a pretty smart doctor who was trying to solve a mystery, but she's by herself trying to figure this out. And that combined with some lack of care that we were getting from the facility eventually led us to go to a different place. And my request as we entered the other place was, look, I want a team of people. I already know this is not on the books. Whatever's going on here is not a normal thing. So I need to know that there's going to be a team Sophie, and that these people are going to, sit around a table bringing their expertise and shoot holes in what's going on and figure this out. And we're very fortunate. We have, a great medical school in this city. And so, there's a lot of, bright young minds out there. Yeah. And I feel like we've absolutely got that. But that being said, it took many months to get to the point where we had any real idea of what was going on in there. And what it came down to really was she had some birth defects that affected her circulatory system. And the heart had issues that were needing to be solved. And then to make things worse, her liver didn't develop right, probably as a result of the blood flow being not correct during development.
So you say many months before they started to land on, was she getting worse? I mean, what was life like for this little human while they were just, throwing darts at what could this be?
She was clearly in pain all the time, just looking for any kind of relief because her body there weren't enough pathways. She was missing her portal vein wasn't developed at all. So there was all kinds of blood that didn't have anywhere to go. And so the body just sort of lets it spill into the stomach area, and she would just swell up. And of course that hurts. And then, just the fact that her liver wasn't really functioning correctly because the blood wasn't going through it like it should, then you have all kinds of other problems that come out of that. And the real challenge then for the medical team was they knew she had heart issues. She had a valve that needed replacing because it didn't develop correctly. And they're like, well, we're not going to touch her if she has a bad liver. And the liver people are like, we can't give her a new liver if she has a bad heart.
Oh, wow. Good grief. And here you and Jenny are in the middle going, whoa, right. Somebody do something.
Right. Well, and, I used to tell them, I'm like, look, I understand that this is a risk and whoever goes first is taking on the biggest risk, but you're not pushing me into anything. If she dies, I'm not going to turn around and sue you for being too aggressive. I'm telling you that it's very clear to me that she will die if we do nothing. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, so we're going to have to do something.
So you're living with that kind of gravity every single day that it is that teetering that much.
The doctors absolutely, once they got to know us and knew how much candor they could sort of use with us, they said, we would ask, okay, when she's screaming her head off and she has a bad heart because she's in pain, if she's screaming her head off, is she going to trigger something to happen? Do we need to try to keep her calm? And of course we would sedate her sometimes in the hospital just to keep that under control. But yeah, and they're like, no, here, the thing is, there's probably not much anything you're going to do that could trigger a catastrophic event. But what's more likely is she'll just go to sleep and not wake up.
Oh gosh.
Which on the one hand, I was glad that they could tell me that clarity because it took some of the stress of just feeling like, what if we do something wrong out of the equation? But at the same time, it's every nap, every night. It's gosh. Like, is she going to be there in the morning? So yes. And it's interesting because we didn't have a path for treatment. It felt even more like the kind of thing that you would want to pray about. You would want to involve a spiritual element to this because it's like you can see things we can't see and that the doctors can't see. Yeah. You need to help us understand what's going on. You've given us gifted doctors. I'm ready to do whatever we have to do, but we still don't know what we're trying to fix. And so that became sort of the mission of our prayers was always like, reveal it to us. Let this next thing that the doctors think it could be, let them be right because there is something we could possibly do for that. Yeah. And, but yeah, they were searching, medical records all over the country and couldn't find any precedent. There was nobody that had this combination of things. Right. And they still to this day don't know what caused it. We just know that she was born with it, which is actually kind of another spiritual thing. As much as I'm watching my kid, suffer with the nature of how her body is made, I did find myself, because you spend so much time in the children's hospital network around other parents and stuff, you find yourself watching parents pray over a kid that's, being attacked by cancer or something. And I'm like, I don't know what I would do in that situation. I at least could come back to the idea that for whatever reason, God made her or allowed her to be made this way.
Right.
And we need to figure out how to fix it. But I don't know. It would have been a whole nother level of probably frustration, I think, if I felt like I was fighting against something that was actively trying to take her out. Yeah. So that you cling to whatever positivity you can think about.
Oh, I can imagine.
But that idea that like, oh, that poor kid in the other bed, their parents are thinking that kid is, being attacked by a disease. And at least we didn't have that.
Well, then at what point you turned into where I definitely wanted to go in our discussion, as early on as things were becoming so evident that this is not your average ailment. What was your prayer life like with so much unknown? And good grief, when you start stumping doctors, that just is not good. But you do have an amazing God to turn to.
That's
but
right.
When things still feel so incredibly impossible,
that's right.
Take me there.
Yeah, it very much felt, again, like, okay, God, you know exactly what's going on here. We're living with an unknown every day. We have this laundry list of what's causing this, what's causing that. So even though you find yourself plopped in the middle of a great mystery, it's like, this is not a mystery to you. What do we need to be doing? What can you do what are you trying to do through this situation? And that was something that my wife kind of expressed early on. She's like, our doctors, which now we have, a lot of by that time, they know us. They know that we're Christian. They know our belief system, and their knowledge and their wisdom is being challenged. And she just kept saying, some of what we're dealing with may be because they need to have this experience. Yeah. They need to have a little humility maybe, or just like see what else they need to learn for the next sort of chapter of their life saving people, So, we're again trying to figure out we know that God has a way of spinning everything for good. And it's like, well, what could possibly be good coming out of this? And that was one of the first things. It's like, well, these doctors, they're learning a lot and maybe that's important, and we have to model that for them, that we trust you and we know that you can only do so much and you're working really hard on it. But we're praying, and I hope, that's okay.
Well, give me some insights into your level of optimism, even just knowing. I mean, I remember my oldest daughter went through some pretty brutal stuff when she was just about to start high school. She was in the hospital for a while. And I remember knowing that I should pray and like crazy pray. But it also remembering those moments where it was like I would get so tunneled on what was wrong with her and that she was stumping doctors. And it's like, why can't she feel anything in her right leg? Mm-hmm. Something is seriously screwy here. And not having that same kind of wide view of God, what are you doing here? And whatever, Lord, the big picture starts to get really foggy when all you can see is your child in a really bad way.
Exactly. Yeah, I felt like it was very much an evolution from we think we know what needs to happen. Please let them be successful. To, okay, it's pretty clear that we've been wrong over and over and over again. It even became kind of a joke that the doctors would, she'd go do a procedure and the doctors would come back and go, well, Sophie's always going to do it her way. This is how it went today, and she'll be in intensive care because something went horribly wrong. And it's just like, so in terms of the prayer sort of model, it very much shifted from, okay, the doctors are going in, they need to be able to fix this vein thing today. Please let them be successful, to, all right, God, it's pretty clear that you're going to do this your way. So all I ask is that we not get in the way doing what we're doing today of what it is needs to happen. So we pray for your will, whatever it is, we don't want to get in the way of it because we think we're smarter than you.
So what did that do for your level of peace as there's so much craziness going on?
Well, I think that is the beauty of having a relationship with God, is that you don't feel as alone. So that idea of, feeling like I'm isolated dealing with this terrible problem. And it's like, no, I've got this person who actually knows things I don't know, God, alongside me. And as long as I'm always saying, hey, if this is what you think is right, then, I'm going to trust that. Then there was some peace, to answer the question more directly. Yeah. There was some peace in just knowing you're not by yourself. You've handed it to him. That's what he commands us to do, and that act of humility I hoped would be honored.
Was that harder to hold on to on certain days over others?
Some days that was pretty difficult. Yeah, to sort of feel like, how long does this have to be a mystery? And how many days does my kid have to suffer? And that the pendulum swings so hard when you have a young child that has, a problem. And we saw it over and over again. You go into this was my wife and my first child, the only child we had and will have. But the point was, it was still sort of a sense of, hey, we've chosen to do this and it's awesome and it's going to be great. And everything is so celebrated. And then all of a sudden it's, oh, she could die at any minute. And it's like the fall from we're creating a life and it's amazing and, we're going to raise this amazing kid to we may not even get a chance to do that because it's all coming apart at the seams. So I'm not saying that's necessarily harder, especially having an older child. I don't know how I would feel about losing an older child that I've had a relationship with for 25 years. That's a whole different thing. But I did find myself going, yes, this swing is pretty hard to take because people who aren't in the loop are going to be like, how's your baby doing? And it's like, oh, well, she's in the hospital. We live at the hospital now. But that's probably a good point to bring up. This was, 2010, 2011. This was when, Facebook had really kind of hooked its claws in everybody. And yet hadn't gone as sour as I think many people see it as these days. And that sense of loneliness of being in an intensive care room for a month, hoping your kid doesn't die at any minute, especially with our network of, believing friends, it was such a relief to be able to say, okay, this is the problem today. And, you're sitting in the corner with your laptop in this, darkened room. And then within, 20 minutes, you got 50 people saying, I'm praying right now for this. I'm praying for you. That was the right tool at the right time. It really became a lifeline to prayer, honestly, not just support, but that idea that not only are people like, oh, I hope this goes well for you, but they're literally dropping what they're doing and praying. And, we work together at a Christian organization and they have prayer sessions. And, little background, I was raised Methodist, super laid back, not charismatic in any way. There's no laying on of hands or any of those things. And yet the organization that we've worked for, does have much more of that slant. And it never bothered me. But all of a sudden, I'm in my workplace. Everyone knows we're suffering through all this stuff. And, there's active prayer that I'm getting to witness, that they're literally coming and, laying hands and just, and I would just be destroyed. I've never experienced anything like that. But again, that was one of those things you would come out of that energized. You're like, there is power to this. So being a little more young Christian at the time, if you want to think of it that way, it really reinforced in me, like there is power in this. You've felt it, when these people say, I'll be praying for you, it's not just a courtesy line. They really are. And all of that, was a tremendous help. And I should also include that when all this happened, my wife also worked here. So there was, they knew her. Now, they pretty much said, work from home if you can. And eventually, once they started talking liver transplant, we were like, oh, the recovery for that's going to be too hard. So she quit. But that, I felt, again, fortunate. If this was some wife that a handful of people had met at a, picnic event or something, it may not have felt as valuable to all of them, but they knew her and they knew me and they knew, how excited we were to have a child together and all of that. So, that was a really constant sort of reinforcement. And I would, and if I hadn't had that, or if I was talking to someone who doesn't have that, I would say that's one more reason to connect with your church, small groups, whatever you can do, because the power of feeling like you're sitting with people who are, on the same page, as great as Facebook was, and knowing, oh my gosh, all these people are dropping everything, right now, you get to witness it only has that much more value.
Yeah. Well, and a term that I feel like is well known in Christendom is the power of prayer. I believe in the power of prayer. I'm curious for you. You just talked about how meaningful it was for you to be surrounded by people with hands on you and calling down heaven. The comfort of prayer. Mm-hmm. Is that just as much a thing?
They say God will meet you where you are. And, if we had transcribed everything we prayed for, especially in the early days when it was much more specific, we really need to fix this vein or whatever it was, you could go look at that list and be discouraged because so many of those things didn't happen the way we asked for them to happen. So I think once again, you sort of let loose of the idea that we have any understanding of what's really happening here, then I think it does start to feel like, oh, okay, well, I need to understand that I have to have this without daily evidence. But he meets you where you are. So there were other moments, that I've always referred to as like a wink from God. Mm-hmm. There were these little moments along the way where it was like, okay, he's paying attention. Yeah. So when you think, I'm not sure he's hearing us, or hearing all the people that are knocking on his door every day on Sophie's behalf, you get these little moments where you're like, well, that's not an accident. Yeah. So it may not be an answered prayer, but it's just this, sort of awareness that things
may not look like what you thought it was going to.
There's some strings being pulled that we can't see. And that makes me feel like, okay, then as long we've invited him into the situation, if there's anything I feel like I learned as I transitioned from sort of a casual Christian and with the sort of, take it or leave it Methodist sensibilities, that at least that's what it translated to for me. No offense, of course, to Methodists by any stretch, but, to go from that to, oh, this is a real thing and this really can matter. And there really is somebody up there, and so I need those every once in a while. And he's usually pretty good about it. And I can now I pray for them. Sure. You literally are like, it may not be a big sign. I'm not asking for a sign. Just show me you're listening. Yeah. And that personal touch, is extremely powerful. Right. So that always helped.
As the surgeries then started to kick in, I mean, was she going on 2 at that point, or was it before?
Yeah, she had her heart valve replaced at 10 months.
Oh, man.
And then that took a while then for her body to sort of stabilize enough to start going after the liver. But of course, during all this time, the liver's still, leaking blood, and her body cavity kept filling up. And, there's all this stuff that we're still juggling, but that we can't mess with yet. And of course, the liver's not working well. So she starts to turn yellow, and, you start to worry what kind of long-term effects letting this go on will be. But right before, it was like 18 months or so almost before 2, she finally did get a liver. And we were very lucky, we put her on the list, and within like a month, boom, she had a liver, which was pretty great.
There's some evidence right there when you hear about how lengthy some of those waits can be for people.
Yes. And again, with social media, you can imagine we're hearing stories and people are sharing stories with us. And we even got connected with support groups and stuff from people that are in other countries who are like, I've been waiting for a liver for my kid for 3 years and we still don't have one, and it's like, oh my gosh, we're so fortunate to be in a place where that can happen so quickly, because time was definitely working against her. Yeah. But I can't tell you how many surgeries she had already by the time we did the liver transplant. But at this point in her life, she's 12 now. She's had somewhere in the neighborhood of 47, 48 surgeries. So surgery was virtually a weekly event for us, certainly monthly for a while. And when the liver went in, it didn't quite the body didn't quite adjust to it correctly. It didn't reject it. It wasn't a rejection issue. It was a plumbing issue. There literally was like different channels where bile needs to flow for things to work right. And they had to do some tubes in there that couldn't stay in the body. So she had tubes that went from outside her body through her liver and then back out to a bag where we could collect anything that, needed to be removed from the body. So, and that was from like age 2 to 6. And we had to change those tubes every 3 to 4 months. So that's part of how she racked up so many surgeries, because it was like, okay, we've got this rigged solution that is not perfect, but we need to let that tube be there and stretch out, because they had to like make a pathway. So again, I bring all this up just to say, we had plenty of evidence that our medical team was smart and was being clever about solving these problems, even though you could, again, look at the laundry list and go, look at all those failed methods and things that didn't work. But it wasn't haphazard. It was just, we've tried this before. Somebody in Boston did this for a kid, and we're going to give it a shot. And, it was just what is going to be right for Sophie. And, people would say, Christian people, intending people, or people with good intentions would say, here's what you ought to do. You ought to pray this scripture, and you maybe need to do this and anoint her with oils and do these things. And I'm not against any of those things. I don't profess to know enough what it is that, God has asked previous people to do and participate as a symbol, or, whatever. But it really did at times reach a tipping point where you're like, okay, I know these people mean well, but they're making it sound like my kid is suffering because I'm not doing the right thing. That's not their intention.
Not exactly comforting.
But you can't help but think that. And, you can imagine at year 2, the amount of fatigue in dealing with all of this, even spiritually and emotionally and all that. I found myself sort of landing on, because people would say, well, another person did that and told you that? Like, what do you feel? And I'm like, well, I think what I've narrowed this down to is, if God's going to keep torturing my kid because I'm not doing the right rain dance, then I want no part of this God. And of course, but I could only say that because he knows that I do believe, and that I don't think it's those things, because it sounds really crass. But I'm like, that's the tension and the sort of.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's why I was asking about optimism, because it's one thing to sit and go, oh man, yes, I'm so glad that I've got this avenue in prayer. But at the same time, I'm not seeing a whole lot. It's not like, poof.
That's right.
She's better.
And that's what I tell. And, I had plenty of non-believer friends that were just like, I'm watching everybody pray and all that stuff. Do you think it's helping? They're trying to sort of learn something about the spiritual walk as a result of this. And so I would feel that sense of responsibility. All right, we're on stage. Yeah. We're on stage with a lot of people that are going to, be affected by this story.
You've become a spokesperson.
That's exactly right. So, I would have to say, here's the thing. Do I believe that God is powerful enough to snap his fingers and fix it in a second? Of course. And it's never off the table. Yeah. There's plenty of evidence with different stories, even in modern times, much less in the Bible. So I know he can work that way. But I would ask, do we think that's his normal go-to? Yeah. I don't think so. I don't think that's what he goes to first. I think he wants to give doctors experiences, and he wants to, my daughter is a tremendous Christian believing little 12-year-old. And who knows what value that will bring to the world, because she knows what she went through. She knows how unlikely it is that she would still be alive, and yet she is. And it wasn't because overnight he healed her. It was a series of little events and little miracles all along the way, and us keeping the faith and having that story attached to her life. Yeah. So you look at all that and go, I think that is more his go-to. I don't think he just wants it to be an easy solution. I think there's too much other things. And I do the same thing now because I've learned to think that way by facing death every day. It's kind of like, well, he's going to probably orchestrate some other thing. He's probably working on something right now that will ultimately be in place to solve this for us. But, I never want to discourage anybody who's like, oh, tomorrow let me go in and the cancer will be gone. It does occasionally happen. But I think you have to lean into that idea that if, maybe he's doing something bigger than a magic trick for you.
Well, even something you just said there, that whether it was a non-believing friend who's watching strangely from a distance or is getting all those updates and seeing so many people interact, that what kind of an impact could that make on somebody who had atheist tendencies or whatever, that got to see an amazing group of people rally around the Bagwills while this was all going on.
Yeah. And I did at the time had sort of a tally in my head of like, that guy's not a Christian. I know it. And, one of my favorite stories was one of the guys is like, he races motorcycles and he's got, tattoos up his neck. And just like, this is the kind of guy you would run into in an alley and be concerned. And although there are plenty of Christians that eventually find God that may look like that, this guy was not that. Like, this is rough around the edges still to this day. And he would get frustrated. He's like, man, I dropped to my knees yesterday and prayed. And I was just like, oh my gosh.
Okay,
that's an amazing
you're the last one I thought would have.
Exactly. So he was frustrated and I'd have to, so again, you got to put on the, hey, I got to help usher this guy across the finish line too, which is you took a chance in doing that. You're taking even a bigger chance by telling me, I want to tell you did the right thing and you don't know the value of what you did. Yeah. And if this is in fact the way this is going to play out, your whole life could be affected by this. So please follow your heart. Keep listening. Whatever instinct you had to, I got to at least give it a try, then I'm all for that.
Right. Good grief. So you chronicled to a degree the first 18 months. You gave the chunk from 2 to 6. At any point, now that she's 12, do you feel like you ever really turned the corner to where, okay, she may not ever have a perfectly working physical system, but she's doing okay. I can let my shoulders drop a little bit and not feel like every nap could be the end. Right. That turning of the corner, for lack of a better term, did that happen at some point? I
feel like it did. I think we, of course, anticipated that or hoped that, with the new liver will come normalcy. We'd fix the heart, most of the heart. We knew that some of the fixes would have to be revisited as she grew. So she's had that valve replaced twice, just as an example, because the one she got when she was 18 months doesn't fit a 10-year-old. So 2 years ago, she had to have it done again. And she'll have to do it again in the future. So there are ongoing issues for sure, but the life-threatening sort of nature of things did sort of die down once the liver was in place. But as I explained, we had, tubes and bags and stuff hanging out of her body, and we had to maintain all that. So we had to change the bandages, which was painful for her because it pulls at the skin, and it's a torturous weekly event.
When you become an erstwhile expert in a category that you probably never would have conceived that would be a thing.
Right.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, it's like I know a bunch of stuff I wish I didn't know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. An expert in an area that you probably would have never chosen in your wildest nightmare.
That's exactly right. And, once we got through the worst of it and things reached a point of more stability, I actually did join some panels and steering committees and stuff for the St. Louis Children's Hospital, for the Children's Hospital here in town. And that was a chance to give back. And I really did feel like part of, what helped us feel like we weren't totally helpless was the fact that they have very patient-centered care in their methodologies. You're included in rounds in the morning. Like, you're going to stand in the circle with all the doctors and give your 2 cents about what happened during the night, what kind of changes in behavior we're seeing, how she tends to react to some of the meds. So they valued the idea that the parents know the kid better than anybody. Right. And of course, we don't know the internals very well, but we can interpret what's going on. And so when that whole thing was over, it was like, okay, I want to give back. I've learned all this stuff that I wish I don't know, including how medical stuff can be treated and how to run a team. It was like, okay, well then I'm going to spread as much of that back as I possibly can. And that made it again feel like, okay, this is one I chose to do that puts another mark in the God's using it for good column. And I very much was grateful to get a chance to do that. And I still do that on occasion.
Well, you mentioned how so many people were praying. And I can just imagine that for you and Jenny, that had to be unbelievably comforting on a constant basis. And you and I have worked together for 9 years now. And I had only heard bits and pieces of this story. And the one that I always go back to, it's got to be 6 or 7 years ago, that Jenny had come down to the office for something and Sophie was with her. And our buddy Russ, he and I were working together that day. And I think he just caught a glimpse of Jenny and Sophie down the hall. And Russ had to stop what he was doing, what we were doing, because it was like, it wasn't like seeing Sophie knowing so much of what you guys had been through still had such a hold on him that I honestly thought that he was tearing up. And he looked at me, again, totally naive to the story, and he's like, every time I see that kid, I am reminded of how amazing God is. And he's getting choked up telling me that. And it's like, I may never get all the ins and outs of the story, but just for Russ to say something like that in about 30 seconds kind of told me all I ever maybe needed to know. And then let me fast forward to just a couple of weeks ago. I saw Jenny and Sophie together. And even again, with what little I knew, it's like, it just looks like a 12-year-old kid.
That's right.
Who would walk by Sophie and go, oh, that poor girl.
That's right.
She's obviously been through so much.
Right.
Unbeknownst.
That's right. Everybody's got a story. But yeah, and it isn't that some people jump to the word miracle right away. And I'm fine with that because again, I absolutely believe that God's hand was all over it. And there were little, for lack of a better term, supernatural little moments here and there that proved that, this wasn't just science that saved her. Sure. But at the same time, there absolutely was a lot of science to save her, and those people that are gifted with the knowledge of what to do with that science. But yeah, and I understand why they absolutely think that way. And that's certainly the way I see her. Because honestly, I had to admit later, we're taking the pictures and we're shooting the video and we're making sure we can post enough to at least involve anyone who wants to get involved without being super negative all the time, right? Because we're always conscious of that, and I think it is even an extension of working for a ministry where it's like, we love to tell stories, that have an incredible God presence. And I knew subconsciously, sort of, although I was somewhat aware, that I felt like I was gathering the material for the piece that we'll have to do on this story when she dies. So I'm like, this is all I'm going to have. So I'm certainly going to take any moment where she's smiling and I'm going to capture it. But it's like, I want to know the whole story. And of course, I'd try to say, no, that's the wrong thinking. She needs to know what her story was. So someday this will be a class project and she'll have all these images. We even have shots of them that I send a camera back and they took pictures of the liver that they took out and the liver that they put in and all kinds of little stuff that they were willing to play along with because they knew I was in media. So yeah, I've got a heck of a story, but the sober thought of, this may be all I have someday. So shoot it. And some of those I still shared, even though we were trying to be as positive as we could, it's like, this is how bad today was, if this gives you some sense. And people, I would run into people that I know, or I had a class reunion at some point during all of this, and people were just like, oh my gosh, like your journey the fact that you've invited us on your journey, it's really spoken to me, and it's really good. And you guys are great. And I love that you were honest and, expressed the days when you were having doubts or whatever. So, again, with today's culture being so selfly oriented, it sounded like, oh, we want to make this about us and share it with everybody. But it really was like, I think God's doing something here. And I have to believe that there's a reason. And that if we just keep it to ourselves, it's kind of limiting the reach. Right. So with this new tool, we're going to see how far that reach really goes.
How hard was it to share when things really felt touch and go, or maybe there had just been a really bad string of days where maybe hope was running low? How hard was it to share with friends, family, anybody that, good golly, this doesn't look promising right now?
You're exactly right. It's a tightrope. When you have something discovered, another piece of the puzzle has become clear, then it's exciting to share because you're like, I have something good to say. This is going to be something that people are going to, appreciate. And I want to celebrate it. And I want to know that they get to celebrate it too, because they're all taking it to their churches and they're praying for her in church prayer groups around the world and stuff. And so, you always were more excited about the positive stuff. But sometimes it would be like, well, if we don't share our concern now, then we're not inviting the support when we need it. We need it now. It's great to know that people can celebrate. It's a little gift to them. You can celebrate this too if you prayed. Thank you. But it was hard. And there were many, many occasions where my wife and I would just go, not this, not today. So you'd put it off and be like, we'll know more by the end of the week. And we can say, it's been a rough week, but here's what we've learned. We would try to pick the moment. When we
try to end on a win.
Right. At least. Yeah. But at the same time, we don't want anyone to feel like it's all okay now because we do believe in prayer. And it's like, yes, I want this.
Was there ever a point when you felt like prayer was all you had?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Multiple?
Yes. And as you pointed out, you do start to learn kind of what's going on, and you can manage some of the symptoms and you can do some things like that. But as soon as something comes along that you're like, I don't know, and we've called the doctor and they don't know either. So it's kind of like, okay, there's no point in necessarily taking her in today unless this escalates. So now you really truly are in a point where you're like, I have nowhere to turn to make this stop. I don't have any options in the world, any fleshly choices. Yeah. So
is it still touchy with her, or at some mile marker were you able to go, all right, she's just a kid. Yeah, we're going to keep an eye on her, but we're going to let her live her life. And
I think, getting the liver was the beginning of feeling like, okay, this sort of life-threatening stuff is starting to be off the table. Her body has what it needs to grow and to function now. But we had these tubes and these bags hanging off of her body. Once we could get rid of the tubes and the bags and all that stuff, then it was, she can take a bath now. She couldn't really take a normal bath. Anything above the waist was dangerous because you would get it into the holes in her torso. So she couldn't swim. She couldn't take a bath, unless it was just a shallow thing and sponge bath kind of a thing. So it's like she's never been in a pool. She's never gotten to do any of these like normal things. Yeah. So once the bag and everything was gone at 5-6 years old, then it was like, okay, we don't have to worry about her going down a slide in a playground because you got bags hanging off your body that are connected internally to your liver. What if that hooks on something? What do you think a 5-year-old's going to do? You put a dog leash around a 5-year-old and let him run around, a playground and see how many times they get it hooked on stuff. So that immediate sense of like, okay, her body is whole and has no extra things. That started to feel like, okay, this is the beginning of normal.
What has Sophie's story done for your faith?
I definitely feel like, as somebody who, again, was a very type A control freak kind of guy, it definitely showed me that I have to be willing to take my hands off the wheel sometimes. And it doesn't mean that I don't still keep my hands on the wheel for things that I want to control, because it's very much an earthly thing and this is just my thing and I want to get it right. But remarkably, the more important the issue is, the more likely I am to say, you know what's great? I don't have to worry about that because I know he's paying attention. And if it matters to me, it matters to him. And although my wife and I felt some similar things along the way, I think the story that is most important that she would want people to hear is what she felt like shifted about her thinking and her prayers. My wife is always quick to tell people that her big learning moment as a Christian was one time when she was praying for a specific thing to stop because her child was being tortured by this phenomenon. And she just couldn't take the fact that Sophie was suffering every day, constantly. And it was like, why don't you fix this? Relieve the suffering. Get them in there to fix this problem. And she feels like she distinctly heard God say, are you praying selfishly because you want to stop seeing this happen? Or do you really want the relief for your kid? And of course, your first thought is, well, of course I want the relief for the kid. Yeah. And his response to her was, then me taking her home may be the only way I stop it. So the question is, are you willing to let this happen just to end the pain? And once she said, yes, I will, excuse me, I am willing to let you take her if that'll stop it. That was the moment that it shifted for her. And she says, I check myself when I pray. Am I praying for myself selfishly, even though it's good for both of us? Am I really looking at it because I don't want to see this happen or I don't like this situation? And how far am I willing to say, it's your plan, just please do it, whatever it takes and whatever it requires of me to have to give up. And that is the level of humility she felt like it was necessary to get to in order to make it through all the stuff that came afterwards, because that was probably the first year that she had that sort of revelation, because that was the worst year.
Is that still bedrock for Jenny to this day?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, she absolutely is always questioning her motives when she brings something to God. And I think that's an interesting lesson. I haven't really ever heard anybody really preach that, but I think it's worth thinking about, and it makes me think, how much control am I really willing to turn over? So it fits nicely with the whole, I'm not the one in charge orchestrating all this, he is, but it's this next step of like, yeah, but would you give up something that you want just to be obedient to the fact that God knows better than you?
Well, that's a level of trust that there's just no category for. That's right. To me, that's standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon and say, okay, I'm just going to lean back. It's your gig. That's right. Could I do that? My quick answer is absolutely not. Exactly. Well, and you do revisit that over and over in your head. Okay, we tell these stories with a certain level of sort of enthusiasm. Maybe not just what we've been talking about, the prayer angle, but just the idea of going through the experience and all the support we got and the victories and how great our kid has turned out. And those things you're excited to share. But how different would the story be if she hadn't made it? Even after, maybe in year 6, when we thought it was all good and we'd had all these amazing things still ultimately happen. And that's one of those things that kind of haunts you. It's like, would I still proudly say, man, God had this under control, and he showed up here and he showed up there and all these people were amazing? Or would it just be, I don't want to talk about it, I lost a kid. And I want to believe in my heart that I would want to be obedient and say, he gave you this experience. Now share it, because people need to observe some things. And obviously I haven't talked about the things that I didn't handle well. So I always want to tell people, don't think this is me coming from some place of I handled it perfectly and I learned all this. And, no, there were plenty of days that were just, it's hard to be. And you asked about that, but I don't have examples for days where I felt like that. But you worry that you're sounding haughty
when you talk about, we believed this and it worked, and, I would never want anyone to take it that way. Right. But you got to share the story. Mm-hmm. So when you asked, it was like, well, yeah, I know this is part of the payback is we have to share this and hope that somebody gets something out of it, something they can apply.
This is one of those times when there is simply no way for me to add some kind of pithy closing to the show. I am just in awe of the power of God. This story will serve as an unforgettable example of a few things for me. One, God is faithful. 2 Timothy 2:23 says that if we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself. 2, that God is approachable. Hebrews 4:16 says, so let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. And lastly, there is power in community. Galatians 6:2 says that we should carry each other's burdens. And the beauty of this is that we don't have to wait until someone is in dire straits. We can approach God any day about anything. And when we do that for each other, each of us is strengthened and encouraged. This series on prayer continues next week, so make sure that you are subscribed to The Nook on your favorite podcast app. And if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, please take a few minutes and hit 5 stars and leave a nice review. Little things like that really do help get the word out about the good things happening on this show. Thank you for listening today, and I will catch you here next time in The Nook.
The Nook Podcast is a production of Sozo Digital Media.